his career there. And then he wanted to come back and play with Brad Stevens. I don't think Brad Stevens, even last year, he had to deal with anything close. This Celtics team, once Kyrie was hurt and once Gordon Hayward obviously was hurt for the entire year, but once Kyrie went out, this team kind of had a college feel, the underdog feel. No one thought that they were going to beat the Sixers the way that Philly was playing and that you had the two best players on the floor were in Sixer uniforms. And the Celtics outplayed them every single game, closed them out down the stretch.
Yeah.
They just had this underdog college type feel to them. And now all of a sudden, this is a team that has massive expectations. They have massive personalities. All of a sudden, you bring Kyrie back into the mix. Jason Tatum elevated himself to a different level. Jaylen Brown is playing at a different level. Terry Rozier's in a contract year. Marcus Smart gets a $50+ million deal. Now you have all these moving parts and personalities. And yeah, I think at times Brad has been just simply outmatched when it comes to dealing with NBA star power and personalities. I think that's a very fair point, just based on the fact that he doesn't have a lot of experience dealing with that.
We've seen a lot of college coaches who are great in college come to the NBA and wash out pretty quickly. It's just not for everybody, and there's nothing wrong with that. Coach K, for example, one of the best college coaches of all time. Who knows what he would have done in the NBA? Same thing with Rick Pitino. You just kind of know your lane, and we'll see where it all washes out for Brad Stevens in the long run. But I'm with you. Last year maybe felt like March Madness to them, and this year just doesn't feel like the same thing.
Yeah, and I think, too, Eric, expectations play into that as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, how expectations, if they're not set up properly, can come back to haunt you. And this Celtics team, last year, once Kyrie was deemed that he was done, the expectations for this Celtics team, even though they were the number one seed, was like, uh-oh, they're in trouble. There's no way they're getting past Philly. And there's no way they're getting past the LeBron-led Cavaliers. It's just not going to happen. All the pressure was off. This year, they had one of the highest win totals in the league set by Vegas. Everybody had this team penciled in as the Eastern Conference champion, that they legitimately had a shot to go dethrone the Warriors because they had so much depth. And I think on this team, Eric, it's almost like they have too much depth. It came out this week that Phoenix had a deal in place trying to get Rozier. And it certainly seems like the Celtics should have taken that deal. It feels like they were so inclined to try to keep all of their assets to make a run at an Anthony Davis if he became available, or just try to keep everybody, keep all their picks and all their players. And now they have 10, 11 guys who all think they're worthy of 25 to 30 minutes a game and 10, 15, however many shots a game. And it's just not enough. This team without Kyrie seem to play better. Maybe they haven't played the competition, Eric, but it always feels like when Kyrie's out of the lineup that the Celtics just play better. Once he's been back, they have struggled immensely, but then they go on the West Coast, they get on a plane together, and they go to Golden State, and they thump the Warriors. I know the Warriors at this point, Eric, probably just are in playoff mode. They could care less. They're just trying to stay healthy. But I felt like that was a pretty good win for this Celtics team, because I do feel like once the playoffs do come around, I feel like some of the ego is going to take a back seat. That guys are going to start to know their role better. Brad Stevens is going to have to shrink that rotation some. It's going to give more minutes to some of the guys that feel they're worthy of them. That's why I don't necessarily think that they're absolutely out of contention. I just think at this point in the season, they have a lot of issues, and they should be where the Bucks are. Let's face it. They should have that kind of record, especially with as bad as the Eastern Conference is right now. I feel like, I know you said at the beginning you weren't sure, but I feel like this team is fully capable of making a run and getting back to the Eastern Conference Finals and getting to the NBA Finals, because right now in that 4-5 matchup, Eric, as a Sixer fan, I am scared to death, because I know that they've struggled, and Embiid has talked about it a lot, where this really isn't a rivalry because the Celtics just kill the Sixers every time. Out of the last 19 games, the Celtics are 17-2 versus the Sixers. Now, that goes back to even before it was Simmons and Embiid, but it just feels like there is something about this Boston team. When they play Philly, they have maximum confidence, and it feels like the Sixers play their worst ball when it comes to playing the Celtics. So that 4-5 matchup, if things would shake out like that, Eric, I, as a Sixer fan, I am very worried.
I'm right there with you. Those Sixers, yeah, I love what they're doing, and I text back and forth with a lot of my friends, Todd and Jason and Brad, and those guys who, Brad's a Celtics fan, and then Todd and Jason are Sixers fans. It's just a lot of back and forth about exactly what you're talking about, that the Sixers just can't seem to find a way anytime they're playing the Celtics. And so as we go into this playoff series that potentially looks like it might happen if they stay 4-5, I would be nervous. I would definitely be nervous because for me, this Sixers team, I think they can do some damage, especially in series, not single games, but series. I feel like there's enough talent there, especially with the moves they've made, that I think they can do well in a full series with the same team. But as to be said so far, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Boston if that's their matchup. I'd like to see it happen.
You want to see it happen versus Boston?
Yeah, I do, because I want to see.
Lord, I don't.
Yeah, I'll tell you why I do, because I think they could beat Boston this time. I think this time will be different. I think they have enough pieces in place through a full series that they could get it done. And I also think that if things start to go sideways a little bit for Boston in the playoffs, Kyrie's going to have one foot out the door. He's going to be calling LeBron and saying, hey, I see that you're sucking wind down there in LA. Maybe it would be a good idea for us to team back up again.
I'll tell you, the thing that concerns me about the Sixers right now is, number one, they haven't spent a lot of time on the court together with all of their big four, because Embiid basically has been hurt since coming off the All-Star break, so he hasn't been right.
Oh, don't get Todd started on that. He is furious that Embiid plays in an All-Star game and gets hurt because he thinks that's the biggest waste of time that potentially affects a season.
Well, I mean, I didn't even know where it came from. Like, all of a sudden, then he plays in the All-Star game, and he played a decent amount of minutes, and then he comes back hurt, and he really hasn't played for this team since. And now you are starting to get inside of 20 games to go, where you're going to have to start figuring out your rotations. You're going to have to start figuring out guys' roles on this team, and you're going to have to figure out how to close out games. They could not close out the Celtics last year in the playoffs, and Saturday night, they had the Warriors down double digits at halftime. They couldn't hold on to it, and the Warriors just blew them out in the second half. So this team's got to figure out how to close. And you talked about with the Celtics, is this coaching staff overmatched, Eric? I've liked Brett Brown for years now. I felt like he went through the time when the cabinets were bare, when it was all about the process, and he had to deal with trying to get these young guys ready to go, and that he had the chance to get this team on the right track with stars and really see what he could do. But I have been less than impressed by him. I mean, that Warriors game Saturday night, I was about to pull my hair out. With 2 minutes to go in that game, Eric, it was like nobody in a Philadelphia uniform had ever watched the end of a basketball game. They're down 3. Then they're fouling with 40, 50 seconds left on the clock. They're not playing things out. Okay, they're trying to extend the game. Then they do the complete opposite of that. Then it was mistakes and turnovers, and it was just like, this team has not yet learned from what happened last year. They have not been able to learn how to close out a game. And it is, I know for Philly fans, it is extremely frustrating, but that's what scares me, because I feel like if you're matching up Philly and Boston, especially in the first round, the best closer on the floor is Kyrie Irving. And if these games go down to the last few minutes and then the last few possessions, I just feel like Boston will find a way to out-execute Philly. And I'm not exactly sure that it's a talent issue with Philly. Eric, I'm starting to feel like it might be a little bit of a coaching issue where if this team gets knocked out in the first round, I think that they're going to get rid of Brett Brown. They just have to do something on this team because they are underperforming for the amount of talent that they have.
Yeah, I think they'd have to, because I know you and I both pulled our hair out last playoffs, and you just mentioned it right there, where a lot of those games against the Celtics in that playoff series that they had last year, I really felt like Philly could have won.
Yeah.
At least.
For sure.
I know one of them for sure, 2 probably, and 3 maybe. And that's how much of a difference that series could have been, save for the last 5 minutes of every single one of those games. I mean, I can remember one of the games specifically where they were up huge, and then the Celtics made a huge run, and you were texting me, call a timeout, stop the run. And Brett Brown just never, ever called a timeout. And the Celtics closed on a 13-0 run and were pulled right back into the game. And it was like, are you kidding me? So I'm with you that, to me, it's a coaching thing. You've got all the talent. Last year, they should have got through the Celtics, and it just kind of looked ugly. This year, the reason I say I want to see them play the Celtics is because I think they can do it talent-wise. But you're right. If they don't, then it's a coaching problem that really needs to be addressed. You cannot waste years of talent like this. And we're seeing that. We're seeing how NBA stars are not unwilling to move cities anymore. This isn't the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant days of the NBA anymore. It's just not. These guys will move around, change cities 3, 4, 5 times in a career if it means that they have more of an opportunity to chase titles. My boy LeBron's very guilty of that. Look at what he's doing. But Kevin Durant, I don't see him staying in the Warriors uniform either. I think there's going to be other guys. Kyrie is not going to stay in Boston. Anthony Davis is not going to stay a Pelican. You're going to see big superstars, especially in their late 20s, early 30s, not afraid to move around. So Kyrie, I think, is leaving the Celtics one way or the other. But again, for Philly, they've got to make this happen, because if not, you cannot waste time with star power. You got to get rid of the coach.
Yeah, because you look at this team. Look, they went out and they made the move to get Jimmy Butler. They went out and they made the move to get Tobias Harris. Both those guys are unrestricted. So if this all falls apart and they get beat in the first round,
Yeah,
I think
Butler ain't staying there.
No, those guys are going to start to look around and say, yeah, you know what? This just isn't working. This thing is not a cohesive unit. There's a lot of rumblings that even Simmons and Embiid don't always see eye to eye, and there's a little bit of ego that's involved there. Then you throw two other guys in that feel like they're max guys. This whole thing could fall apart based on matchups. So really, I think the best for the Sixers, and even for the NBA, Eric, I think that they would much rather get through the first round and then somehow have it set up where you have some variation of Milwaukee, Toronto, Philly, and Boston in that semifinals, because I think those are the four teams everybody wants to see play. If somehow it's a 4-5 matchup with the Sixers and Boston, one of those teams are not going to make it. Then you're going to bring up one of these other teams. You're going to be watching a Pacers team that, frankly, when they get into a 7-game series with one of those other teams, either a Milwaukee or Toronto, I think they're going to struggle.
It might get swept.
And you look at 6, 7, 8 and down and who could make it.
Geez.
They just don't have the talent. So I think for the NBA, they are hoping that Indy falls back to 4 or 5 and it sort of splits that up. And then you can get those 4 teams into the second round, because I think then you're going to get to see some really good series. You're going to get to see some rivalries being built up. These guys have a lot of young talent, and outside Toronto, where you don't really know what's going on there. But the other 3 teams, they could be around for a while in the East. And I think that's what the Eastern Conference needs. That's what the NBA, frankly, needs, because it doesn't look like, Eric, they're going to have LeBron to bank on.
What?
In these playoffs.
What?
I know. I saved him for the last here in this segment because I didn't want to get you riled up. But since we talked last week,
you don't even have to do anything, and he riles me up. He's on social media all the time.
Things have only gotten worse for your Lakers here.
Why do you keep calling them my Lakers? I'm not a Lakers fan.
Well, they are your Lakers. I mean, they were your Cavs. They were your Heat.
Yeah.
They were your Cavs again.
All right, that's fair.
But where do you feel like, when you watch this team, where do you feel like the blame lies? I mean, I know you're a LeBron homer. How much of this is on LeBron? How much of this is on Luke? Or how much of this is on team construction by the front office?
Oh, they're all going to share responsibility, including LeBron.
Is it all just an evenly sliced a piece of pie here?
No, I'm not going to go even, because I can't throw Luke Walton under the bus that quickly. Look, I'm not saying he's a Pat Riley. I'm not saying he's a Phil Jackson type of coach. He hasn't dealt with this kind of adversity. Again, he's coached the team through the last few years where, quite frankly, they just weren't very good. And they were building stars. They were building these younger players. They've got Kuzma. They got Hart. They got these guys, Lonzo, that maybe were pieces to something or even trade bait. But that's who Luke Walton was coaching the past couple years. Now it's a totally different environment. And we've talked about that. We're not going to rehash that. You bring in LeBron James, and quite frankly, you're just not the coach anymore. LeBron's the coach. That's just how it works. So I put a lot of that on LeBron James. That's the atmosphere he brings to an NBA franchise. And you're just going to have to deal with that. If you want all of the benefits and all of the marketing and all of the good things that come with LeBron James, like selling out arenas and selling a lot of jerseys and doing all the things on television and social media, great. But you're also going to deal with a lot of headaches as well. That's certainly not something you can just completely put on Luke Walton. So LeBron James, probably I would have to say 50% of the blame goes on him. 20% maybe on Luke Walton, because he's just not experienced enough to coach this situation. And then I got to throw 30% of it on Magic Johnson again in the front office and whatever their game plan was. I quite frankly don't think it's working. I don't think whatever they thought was going to happen from the time that LeBron agreed last year to come to LA until now, I don't think it has gone at all the way that they thought it would. I don't know how you feel about that, Justin, but I don't think it went how they thought it would. I think they felt like they would legitimately get a big trade by offering some of these pieces, and it didn't happen. I think you're starting to see the NBA revolt a little bit against LeBron James. I really believe that. I think that they don't want him in the finals again. I don't mean the NBA as a organization. I mean the other teams in the NBA. And I just think that you're just not having people migrate toward LeBron James probably from this point forward till the end of his career. And so that's going to be an issue for these Los Angeles Lakers. I mean, maybe you pull a guy like Kyrie in, or maybe you pull a guy who has a personal relationship with LeBron James. But outside of that, you're going to have a hard time getting some of the big names to come be second fiddle to an aging LeBron James. And so that's just a situation that they're going to have to work through from the coach, from the general manager, and then from the teammates of